The old Ford rattled in a way that was almost comforting, a familiar percussion against the silence of the forest. For me, Liam Olson, this truck was more than a vehicle. It was my office, my dining room, and my sanctuary on wheels. For 12 years, the woods of Washington's Cascade Range had been my workplace. I knew the contours of the land like the lines on my own hand, the scent of damp soil after a rain, the specific cry of a red-tailed hawk circling overhead. Routine was the backbone of my job, a rhythm of safety checks, trail maintenance, and the occasional lost hiker to guide back to civilization. It was a good life, a quiet one. That Tuesday started like any other. A veil of morning mist clung to the towering Douglas firs, filtering the sunlight into hazy, ethereal beams. The air was cool and thick with the smell of pine and wet earth. I was on the North Ridge Patrol, a winding dirt track that snaked deep into a less trafficked part of the park. Most tourists stuck to the marked waterfalls and scenic overlooks. Out here, it was usually just me and the wildlife. That's why I noticed it immediately. A subtle shift in the air, an intruder in the symphony of natural smells. It was faint at first, barely there but unmistakable. Wood smoke. My posture straightened. My senses, usually relaxed, snapped to high alert. Unauthorized fires were a cardinal sin out here. Even with the recent rains, the risk was always present, a sleeping dragon that could awaken with a single stray spark. I pulled the truck over, killing the engine. The sudden silence was absolute, broken only by the drip of water from fern fronds. I grabbed my pack and my radio, stepping out into the quiet woods. The smell was stronger now, carried on a gentle breeze from the east. I moved through the undergrowth with practiced ease, my boots making little sound on the mossy ground. There was no trail here. Whoever lit this fire was deliberately off the beaten path. My mind ran through the possibilities. Careless campers, maybe some kids looking for a thrill, or worse, poachers. Whatever the reason, my job was to find it and shut it down. After about a 10-minute hike, pushing past sword ferns and ducking under low-hanging cedar branches, I found the source. In a small, natural clearing, a ring of stones held a small, tidy fire. It wasn't a raging inferno, but a polite, well-managed blaze, with flames dancing calmly over a bed of glowing orange embers. It was recent, very recent. A single log had been dragged up to serve as a bench. On it sat an open book, placed face down as if its reader had just stood up to stretch. Next to it, a metal camping mug still had a wisp of steam rising from its lip. A half-eaten apple, its flesh starting to brown, lay beside it. The scene was one of peaceful interruption. It looked like someone had just stepped away for a moment, but the silence was wrong. It was heavy, profound. I stood at the edge of the clearing, listening. No voices. No sound of someone gathering wood or relieving themselves behind a tree. Just the soft crackle and pop of the fire. "Hello," I called out, my voice feeling unnaturally loud. "Forest Ranger, anyone here?" Only the forest answered. The wind whispered through the high canopy, and a jay squawked in the distance. No human reply. I waited a full minute, scanning the dense wall of trees that surrounded the clearing. Nothing moved. A prickle of unease traced its way up my spine. This wasn't right. People don't just leave a fire burning and walk away. Not like this. Where was their tent? Their packs? There was nothing. No gear, no food supplies, no shelter, just the fire, the book, and the half-eaten apple. My training took over. I cautiously circled the site, my eyes scanning the ground for tracks. I found footprints, a single set, from what looked like a standard hiking boot. They were clear in the soft earth near the fire, but became impossible to follow as they hit the carpet of moss and fallen needles at the edge of the clearing. It was as if the forest had simply swallowed them. I picked up the book. It was a collection of poems by Mary Oliver. The page it was held open to was dog-eared. The whole scene felt intimate, personal. This wasn't a party spot. It felt like a place of quiet reflection. I put the book back down, exactly as I'd found it. The unease was growing now, turning into a knot of genuine concern in my gut. Every instinct I had, honed by years in these woods, was screaming that something was fundamentally wrong here. People don't vanish into thin air. I keyed the mic on my radio, my gaze sweeping over the empty, silent clearing one more time. The cheerful little fire crackled on, oblivious, a warm and welcoming beacon in a place that suddenly felt cold and empty. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Olson, over." The static-laced reply came back instantly. "Go for dispatch, Liam. What's your status?" "I'm off the North Ridge Trail, about 2 miles east of Marker 7, I said, my voice steady despite the feeling in my stomach. "I've found an unauthorized campfire. It's still active, but there's a problem." I paused, looking at the solitary log, the steaming mug. "There's no one here." "Dispatch, I've secured the fire. Beginning a perimeter search of the immediate area. Over." My voice was steady, a practiced calm that didn't quite reach the knot tightening in my gut. Sarah's voice crackled back, a clipped acknowledgement that she'd received my transmission and that a sheriff's deputy was en route, though their ETA was at least an hour. An hour. In these mountains, an hour could be an eternity. The sun was already beginning its slow descent, and the golden afternoon light was starting to bleed into the long, cool shadows of dusk. The silence that followed the radio's click was profound. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of an undisturbed wilderness. It was the heavy, watchful silence of a room right after a shout. I took a methodical breath, pushing down the unease and pulling up years of training. First things first, evidence. I began a slow, deliberate spiral outward from the still smoldering fire pit. The damp, loamy earth, softened by the morning's drizzle, was a perfect canvas for tracks. I found them quickly. A single set of footprints, clear and distinct. They were from a pair of sturdy hiking boots, maybe a women's size 7 or 8, with a deep, aggressive tread pattern. They moved with a confident, unhurried gait away from the small camp, heading not back toward the main trail, but deeper into the dense undergrowth of Douglas fir and sword ferns. This wasn't someone who was lost. This was someone heading somewhere with purpose. I followed the tracks, my eyes scanning the ground. They led me about 50 yards from the camp, to the edge of a small, natural clearing carpeted with a thick, undisturbed layer of pine needles. And then they stopped. It wasn't a fade, or a scuff, or a sign of a struggle. The last clear boot print was pressed into the soft dirt at the edge of the pine needle patch. The next step should have landed squarely in the middle of the clearing. But there was nothing. No impression, no displaced needles, not even a broken twig. I crouched, my gloves brushing the ground. It was as if the person who made them had simply been plucked from the air. My heart hammered against my ribs. I've seen tracks disappear at riverbanks, on hard rock faces, or on paved roads. But here, in the middle of soft, yielding forest floor, it made no sense. I stood and did a full 360, my gaze sweeping the trees. There were no low-hanging branches they could have grabbed, no nearby game trails suggesting a sudden change in direction. It was a physical impossibility. A cold dread, far sharper than simple concern, began to seep into my bones. This forest was my office, a place I understood. But this was an anomaly, a glitch in the known world. Frustrated, I swept my flashlight beam across the perimeter of the clearing, hoping for something, anything, I had missed. A glint of white, tucked beneath the broad leaf of a fern, caught my eye. I knelt, carefully parting the vegetation. Lying there, stark against the dark green, was a single, white wireless earbud. It was clean, as if it had fallen just moments ago. A tiny, mundane piece of technology that felt utterly out of place in the face of this impossible riddle. I carefully picked it up with a pair of tweezers from my kit and sealed it in an evidence bag. It was something, but it only deepened the mystery. Just as I slipped the bag into my pack, my radio crackled to life, making me jump. "Ranger Olson, this is dispatch. I have SAR coordinator Mark Jensen on the line for you. Go ahead, Mark." A new voice, gruff and no-nonsense, filled the air. "Olson, Jensen here. Give me a sitrep." "What are we looking at?" I took a breath. "Mark, I have an abandoned campsite, fire still warm. Single set of tracks leads about 50 yards into the woods and then vanishes. Completely. Ground is soft, no explanation for the termination. I just located a single earbud near the end of the tracks. The whole scene feels wrong. No signs of a struggle. It's too clean. There was a pause on the other end. I could almost hear Mark processing the strangeness of my report. Before he could respond, Sarah's voice cut back in, her tone now tight with urgency. "Liam, Mark, we just got a call. An overdue hiker. A woman named Emily Carter, 28. Her husband reported her an hour ago. She was on a solo day hike on the Sky Ridge Trail, which is about 2 miles east of your position. She was supposed to check in by 3 p.m. Her phone is going straight to voicemail." My blood ran cold. Emily Carter. The mystery now had a name. I looked up from the place the tracks ended, into the darkening maze of ancient trees. The forest no longer felt like my office. It felt like a predator, and the clock was ticking. It wasn't just about finding a missing person anymore. It was about finding her in a place where the rules of the world seemed to have been suspended. Mark Jensen's voice crackled through the radio, sharp and stripped of any warmth. It was the voice of a man in a control room miles away, looking at maps and personnel charts, not the unnerving emptiness of the forest. "Ranger Olson, your priority now is scene preservation. Do not contaminate the area further. A sheriff's deputy is en route to your location, ETA approximately 20 minutes. The 1st SAR ground team is mobilizing at the Solitude Trailhead. You are to wait for the deputy and assist as required. Acknowledge." The order was standard procedure, logical and clear, but logic felt like a foreign language right now. "Acknowledged," I replied, my own voice tight. "Coordinator, I need to be clear. I've followed the prints from the camp. A single set. They lead to this spot, an open patch of soft earth, and they just stop. There's no disturbance, no other tracks, nothing." I was pleading, trying to convey the impossibility through the radio waves. There was a brief pause, filled with the soft hiss of static. "Your report is noted, Ranger," Mark said, his tone unchanged. He wasn't dismissing me, not exactly, but he was compartmentalizing. The weirdness was a data point, nothing more. "Let the investigators handle the forensics. Maintain your position and observe." The line clicked off, plunging the clearing back into a profound silence broken only by the whisper of the wind through the high canopy of Douglas firs. Frustration, hot and sharp, pricked at me. I backed away from the impossible endpoint of the trail, moving carefully to the edge of the clearing. My job was now to wait, to stand guard over a scene where the primary evidence violated the basic laws of physics. I looked back at the campsite, the cheerful orange tent and abandoned book now looking like a memorial. The minutes stretched, each one feeling longer than the last. The afternoon sun began its slow descent, and the light filtering through the trees turned from a bright, clean white to a watery gold. Shadows deepened, and the forest, which had felt peaceful on my patrol, now seemed to be watching me with a quiet, ancient indifference. I pulled the single white earbud from my pocket, turning the smooth plastic over in my gloved fingers. It was a piece of Emily Carter, a tiny, tangible link to the woman who had walked to this spot and ceased to exist. The sharp crack of a twig breaking nearby snapped my head up. It wasn't an animal. The sound was deliberate, heavy. A moment later, a figure in the dark green uniform of the county sheriff's department emerged from the trees. She was a woman in her late 40s, her brown hair pulled back in a tight bun, her face etched with the calm, no-nonsense lines of someone who had seen it all. "Ranger Olson?" she asked, her voice steady. "I'm Deputy Miller. Dispatch said you found something unusual." Relief washed over me. "That's one word for it," I said, walking to meet her. "Thanks for getting here so fast." I gave her the full tour, starting with the smoldering campfire, which I had since properly extinguished. She knelt by the half-eaten apple and the open book, taking notes in a small, waterproof pad without disturbing anything. Her expression was unreadable. Then I led her to the footprints. "Standard size 8 hiking boot, looks like," she murmured, her trained eyes picking up the details instantly. I walked her along the trail, narrating my steps. She walked from the camp, steady pace, no signs of running or distress. We arrived at the final pair of prints. "And this is it," I said, gesturing to the bare earth beyond them. "This is where they end." Deputy Miller didn't respond immediately. She crouched low, her gaze sweeping over the ground. She walked a slow, deliberate circle around the area, her eyes scanning the forest floor, the low-hanging branches, the thick trunks of the surrounding trees. "No drag marks," she said, more to herself than to me. "No broken branches overhead, no scuff marks, no sign of a struggle at all." She stood up and finally looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something beyond professional detachment in her eyes. It wasn't quite belief, but it was a serious, troubled consideration. "You're right, Ranger, that's unusual." As if on cue, my radio crackled to life again. "Ranger Olson, is Deputy Miller on scene?" It was Mark Jensen. Miller unclipped her own radio. "This is Deputy Miller, I'm on scene," she responded. "Good," Mark's voice replied, a fraction less robotic now that he was speaking to a fellow law enforcement officer. "I have the husband, David Carter, on a patched call. He's having a hard time. I need one of you to get a statement, find out what she was wearing, any specific plans, any gear we should be looking for." Miller's demeanor shifted instantly, a subtle softening around her eyes. "Understood, patch him through." A click and then a man's voice, thin and frayed with panic, filled the air. "Hello, is anyone there? Have you found my wife? Have you found Emily?" "Mr. Carter, this is Deputy Miller with the Sheriff's Department," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "Sir, we have located what we believe to be your wife's campsite. Is she there? Is she okay?" The desperation in his voice was a physical thing, a painful weight in the quiet clearing. "No, sir, she is not here at the moment," Miller said carefully. "We are just beginning our search for her. It's very important you help us. Can you tell me exactly what she was wearing today?" Through choked sobs, David Carter described a blue rain jacket, dark gray hiking pants, and the very boots whose prints lay before us. "She just wanted to clear her head," he managed to say, his voice cracking. "Things have been stressful. She loves these woods, she knows them. The Solitude Trail, she said she just needed some solitude. She's strong, she's so strong. Please just find her." The call ended, leaving a heavy silence. Miller looked from the footprints to me, her professional mask back in place, but her eyes holding a new, grim urgency. "Okay," she said, her voice low. "The SAR team will be here any minute. Let's start widening the perimeter ourselves." The sun was now touching the tops of the distant peaks, and long, distorted shadows bled across the forest floor. The organized, official search was about to begin, but standing there, I couldn't shake the cold certainty that we were all missing the one impossible question. Not where Emily Carter went, but how. The day began like any other, which is to say, with a profound and comforting silence. The kind of quiet that sinks into your bones, broken only by the low rumble of my Ford's engine and the gentle hiss of coffee from my thermos. Dawn in the MT. Baker Snoqualmie National Forest wasn't so much a sunrise as a slow, gray bloom, the light gradually seeping through the dense canopy of Douglas firs and western hemlocks. A crisp, late autumn chill clung to the air, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. This was my office, all million acres of it, and most days, I wouldn't have traded it for anything. My name is Liam Olson, and for the last 8 years, being a forest ranger has been less a job and more a definition of who I am. It's a life of solitude and watchfulness. You learn to read the language of the forest, the meaning of a snapped twig, the mood of the wind, the subtle shift in animal calls that signals a change in the weather or the presence of something that doesn't belong. You learn that the wilderness is brutally indifferent. It doesn't care about your plans or your problems. It simply is. And you learn to respect that deeply. My morning patrol was routine. I checked on a designated campground near the Nooksack River, my tires crunching over the gravel road. I found a young couple from Seattle, barely out of their 20s, packing up their tent. They were laughing, full of the kind of vibrant energy that the city instills in people. I also saw the thin wisp of smoke curling from their fire pit. I pulled over, the official green and white of my truck announcing my purpose before I ever stepped out. "Morning," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Looks like you had a good night." The young man, all nervous energy, immediately looked at the fire. "Oh, shoot. I thought I put that out, poured water on it and everything." "Let's take a look," I said, walking over. I kicked at the edge of the pit with my boot. Underneath the wet surface ash, a small core of embers glowed a menacing orange. "You need to douse, stir, and douse again. Feel it with the back of your hand. If it's still warm, it's not out." I gave them the standard speech, the one I'd given 1,000 times. They were apologetic and a little embarrassed, quickly grabbing their water jugs to finish the job properly. It was a simple, common mistake. A moment of carelessness that, on a drier day, could cost thousands of acres. Today, it was just a teachable moment. Leaving them to their packing, I continued my patrol, turning off the paved byway and onto a rutted Forest Service road. The deeper I went, the more the forest asserted itself. The trees grew tighter, their massive trunks creating a cathedral of shadow and light. The radio on my dash crackled intermittently with chatter from other rangers, a distant, reassuring tether to the human world. For the most part, though, there was only the sound of my truck and the vast, breathing wilderness. I thought about the people who come out here. Most, like that couple, were looking for a scenic backdrop for their weekend. But some came looking for something more: solitude, a place to unravel the knots in their minds. The forest was good for that, but it was also a place where you could get lost in more ways than one. Every seasoned ranger has stories of hikers who walked off the trail for just a minute and were never seen again, swallowed by the sheer scale of it all. The land doesn't keep secrets, but it does make things disappear. It erodes tracks, covers scents, and muffles sound. By early afternoon, the sky had changed. The clear, crisp morning had given way to a high, milky overcast that stole the warmth from the sun. The wind shifted, now coming down from the north with a colder bite. A familiar restlessness settled over me. It was the feeling that precedes a change, a subtle tension in the air. I parked my truck near the trailhead for Yellow Aster Butte, a more strenuous and less trafficked hike. I was just going to check the trail register and make sure the signage was still intact after last week's winds. I swung the door open and stepped out into a quiet that felt different. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of the morning. It was a void. The usual chatter of squirrels and jays was absent. The wind rustled the leaves, but it felt like a held breath. And then I smelled it. Faint, but sharp and unmistakable on the cold air. Wood smoke. Not the smoldering, days-old scent of a neglected fire pit. This was the clean, hot scent of actively burning pine. And it was coming from somewhere off-trail, deep in the woods where no fire should be. My entire demeanor shifted. The routine was over. A knot of professional concern tightened in my gut as I turned my face to the wind, my eyes scanning the dense, silent trees. Something was wrong. The temperature dropped with the sun. A deep, penetrating cold, born in the high-altitude glaciers of Mt. Baker, was now seeping down through the valleys, wrapping the forest in a damp chill. The generator for the portable floodlights buzzed, a monotonous, mechanical insect against the deepening silence of the woods. It cast long, dancing shadows that made the familiar trees look like skeletal giants, their branches reaching like gnarled fingers. Deputy Miller and I stood by the taped-off clearing, the steam from our breath pluming in the harsh white light. The abandoned campfire was now a pit of black, dead ash. The crunch of gravel from the fire road signaled their arrival. A white Whatcom County SAR truck, mud-splattered and utilitarian, pulled up behind Miller's cruiser. Doors opened and closed, and a team of 4 volunteers in bright orange jackets began to unload gear with practiced efficiency. Their leader, a woman with a sharp, intelligent face and hair pulled back in a tight, practical ponytail, strode towards us. Her name was Sarah Jennings. "Liam Olson, Deputy Miller?" she asked, her voice crisp and businesslike. We nodded. "Mark Jensen briefed me. I'm Sarah. This is my team." She gestured back at the volunteers preparing their packs and headlamps. "Let's walk the scene. Talk me through it again from the top." I recounted everything, from the smell of smoke to the discovery of the camp. I led her to the small clearing where the footprints had ended, the ground now illuminated by our powerful flashlights. Sarah knelt, her gloved fingers hovering just above the last impression in the dirt. Her expression was one of intense, professional focus. "The ground is firm here," she observed, pressing a thumb into the soil nearby. "But not rock hard. A scuff, a drag mark, something should have been left behind. You're certain no one has disturbed this spot since you found it?" "Positive," I said. "I secured it as soon as I realized what I was looking at." Miller chimed in. "We've both been over it. There's nothing. It's like she was just lifted out." Sarah stood up, a slight frown creasing her brow. She didn't mock the idea. She simply ignored it, her mind locked on procedure. "Okay, we'll start with a standard expanding grid search, centered on this point of last contact. Standard callouts. Everyone keeps their radio on channel 3. We're looking for any sign of passage, broken twigs, snagged clothing fibers, another footprint. Anything, let's move." Her team was a well-oiled machine. Within minutes, they had formed a line, spaced about 20 feet apart, their headlamps cutting synchronized arcs through the oppressive darkness. The forest, which had been unnervingly quiet, was now filled with their calls. "Emily, search and rescue." The voices were loud, human, and yet the forest seemed to swallow them whole. They echoed once, then vanished, leaving only the rustle of leaves in the night wind. Miller and I remained at the edge of the clearing, a de facto command post. The wait was agonizing. Every snap of a twig in the distance made my head jerk up. Every flicker of a distant headlamp through the trees offered a brief, false spike of hope. About an hour into the search, Miller's radio crackled. It was Mark Jensen. "Miller, you there? Go for Mark." The husband, David Carter, just arrived at the trailhead. "He's agitated. I'm keeping him here at the base, but he wants updates." "Anything for me to tell him?" Miller glanced at me, his face grim in the glow of the floodlights. "Negative, Mark. The ground team is doing its first sweep. Nothing yet. Tell him we're doing everything we can." The radio went silent, but the knowledge that David Carter was just down the mountain, waiting, added a new layer of weight to the cold air. This wasn't an abstract mystery anymore. It was a man's life, a family, being torn apart in real time. I felt a knot of frustration tighten in my gut. We were following the book, running the plays, but the book had nothing on a person who could vanish from solid ground. Another 90 minutes crawled by. Finally, the orange jackets began to reappear from the gloom, one by one, converging on our position. Their shoulders were slumped. Their faces, beaded with sweat despite the cold, were etched with fatigue and failure. Sarah was the last to arrive. She pulled off her gloves and ran a hand over her face. "We did a full 360-degree sweep, 100 yards out," she reported, her professional tone now frayed with exhaustion. "We found 3 deer trails and a lot of squirrel nests. No tracks, no clothing, no sign of a shelter. Not a single trace of Emily Carter past that last footprint." She looked from me to Miller, then back to the empty spot in the clearing. For the first time, a flicker of doubt, of the same unease I'd felt all afternoon, crossed her face. The methodical, by-the-book search had collided with the impossible reality of the scene and come up empty. We stood there in a strained silence, the generator humming its indifferent tune. The first wave of the search was over, and the mystery, now shrouded in the vast, cold darkness of the North Cascades, was deeper and more terrifying than ever. The forest was a cage of blackness and cold. Back at the campsite, the failure of the grid search hung in the air, thicker than the scent of damp earth and pine. Sarah Jennings stood with her arms crossed, her flashlight beam cutting a frustrated line across the abandoned tent. Her professionalism was a mask, but I could see the cracks forming around her eyes. Deputy Miller kicked at a loose stone near the fire pit, the sound unnervingly loud in the oppressive silence. Hope, which had flickered briefly with the arrival of Sarah's team, was now a dying ember, much like the campfire we had painstakingly extinguished. "I've never seen anything like it," Sarah said, her voice low. "It's not just a lack of evidence. It's an absence. It's like the ground swallowed her whole." "People don't just evaporate, Sarah. Miller countered, though his tone lacked conviction. Before I could add my own weary agreement, my radio crackled to life, breaking the tension. It was Mark Jensen. "Liam, Miller, what's your status?" I keyed the mic. "First sweep is complete, Mark. Negative contact. The track still ends at the same point. We're regrouping at the primary scene." There was a pause, then Mark's voice returned, carrying a renewed sense of purpose. "Understood. We're sending in the K-9 unit. Officer Reed and his partner, Kodiak, are en route to your location. ETA 15 minutes. Give them a clean scene." A collective sigh of relief, however small, passed through our group. A dog's nose was a different kind of tool, unburdened by logic or the need for visual proof. If there was a scent to follow, the dog would find it. 15 minutes later, a new set of headlights pierced the woods. Officer Reed was a tall, lean man with a quiet confidence that seemed to flow down the leash to the magnificent German shepherd at his side. Kodiak was all business, his intelligent eyes scanning the scene, his body poised and ready. After a brief, quiet exchange with Sarah and Miller, Reed led Kodiak to the camp chair where Emily's book still lay. "Okay, boy," Reed murmured, letting the dog sniff the worn paperback. "Find her. Find." Kodiak's tail gave a single, sharp wag. He lowered his nose to the ground and immediately picked up the trail. He moved with an incredible certainty, tracing the exact path of footprints I had found hours earlier. He navigated the slight curve around a moss-covered log and headed directly for the clearing. We followed at a respectful distance, our flashlights trained on the dog, a bubble of tense anticipation moving with us through the trees. He entered the small clearing, his pace steady. Then he stopped. It was the exact spot, the point of impossibility. Kodiak froze for a second, his nose twitching frantically. He whined, a low, confused sound that vibrated with distress. He circled the spot once, twice, then backed away, the fur on his neck beginning to bristle. He looked back at Reed, his ears flat against his head, and let out a soft bark that was more question than alert. "What is it, boy?" Reed urged, stepping forward. He knelt, running a hand over the ground, as if he could feel what the dog was smelling. Kodiak refused to approach the spot again, pacing anxiously at the edge of the clearing. "The scent's gone," Reed announced, standing up and shaking his head in disbelief. "It's not faded, it's not old, it's just gone. It stops right here." Cold, I've never seen him react like this. He's spooked. The finality of the dog's failure was a punch to the gut. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of snapping branches and a desperate, raw shout from the direction of the trail. "Where is she? What are you people doing?" We all turned to see a figure stumbling toward us, illuminated by our converging flashlight beams. It was David Carter, his face pale and streaked with tears, his eyes wild with a mixture of terror and rage. He had blown past the police tape. "Sir, you can't be here," Miller said, moving to intercept him. "This is an active search area." "I don't care." David shoved past him, his gaze locking onto the empty clearing. "I have to see. Maybe I'll see something you missed. You're all just standing around." He was spiraling, consumed by a panic so profound it was painful to watch. I stepped forward, holding up a hand. "David," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. "My name is Liam Olsen. I'm the ranger who found your wife's camp." He stopped, his chest heaving. He looked at me, then at the desolate scene. The fight seemed to drain out of him, replaced by a wave of crushing despair. "She wouldn't just wander off," he choked out, tears streaming down his face. "Not now, not after we were finally getting things right." The words hung in the cold air, an opening. "Getting what right, David?" I asked gently. He squeezed his eyes shut. We were having a hard time," he admitted, his voice cracking. This trip was for her, to clear her head. But we were talking. We were making plans. We were supposed to go to the San Juan Islands next month for our anniversary. She booked the ferry herself. She wouldn't miss that. She wouldn't just leave me. He finally collapsed into sobs, a man utterly broken by a mystery none of us could solve. Deputy Miller put a steadying hand on his shoulder, guiding him back toward the trail. The rest of us were left standing in the clearing, the impossible evidence now colored by a very real and painful human story. The gray light of dawn did little to lift the oppressive weight that had settled over the command post. The air was cold, thick with the scent of damp earth and failure. Coffee tasted like ash. David Carter sat huddled in a camp chair, a thick wool blanket draped over his shoulders by a volunteer, his face a hollow mask of grief. Every time my gaze drifted toward him, I felt a fresh wave of frustration. The forest wasn't supposed to win, not like this. Mark's voice crackled over the radio, a tired, procedural drone about winding down the active ground search pending new intelligence. New intelligence. It sounded like a prayer for a miracle. I looked back toward the tree line, toward the silent clearing that held its secret so tightly. We had all missed something. It was the only explanation that made sense. "Mark, this is Olsen," I said into my radio, my voice low. "I'm going back in. One more sweep of the primary site, on foot, alone." There was a pause. "Liam, we've had 20 people and a dog go over that ground." "I know," I replied, my eyes fixed on the woods. "But we were looking for a trail leading out. Maybe we should have been looking for one leading down." It was a half-formed thought, a desperate grasp at anything other than the void. I didn't wait for his approval. Slinging my pack over my shoulder, I walked back toward the yellow tape, the forest swallowing me in its silence once again. This time, I wasn't searching, I was observing. I moved slowly, my focus narrowed to a 10-foot radius around the spot where the boot prints and Kodiak's scent trail had ended. The ground was a carpet of fallen leaves, pine needles, and damp soil. It was impossibly, maddeningly normal. On my hands and knees, I began to clear the leaf litter, my fingers growing numb from the cold, wet earth. It was a tedious, almost meditative act. I worked in a grid, just as we'd been trained, but with a forensic slowness. An hour passed. Then my fingertips brushed against something hard and cold. Not a rock. It was metallic. I carefully scraped away the surrounding dirt and pulled it free. It was a key. Small, almost delicate, with an ornate, filigreed head, nothing like a modern car or house key. It looked like it belonged to a music box or an old diary. I stared at it, nestled in my muddy palm. It was so small, so insignificant, yet it felt like the entire case had just pivoted on its tiny weight. Holding the key, I looked at the ground with new eyes. The depression Kodiak had shied away from, it wasn't just a dip in the terrain. There was a subtle, almost imperceptible regularity to its shape, an unnatural straight edge hidden beneath a thick layer of humus and overgrowth. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I dug with renewed urgency, tearing at the roots and soil with my bare hands. My fingers hit solid, rusted iron. A crosshatch pattern. I scrambled back, pulling a small entrenching tool from my pack and hacking at the earth. Slowly, grimly, a large, rectangular iron grate was revealed. It was a storm drain access point, a forgotten piece of park infrastructure, a culvert large enough for a person to crawl through, almost completely swallowed by the forest floor. "Mark, it's Liam," I gasped into the radio, my voice ragged. "I found it. She didn't vanish. She went underground." The silence on the other end was electric. Then, Mark's voice, sharp and clear, "Stay where you are, Liam. We're coming to you." The next hour was a blur of controlled chaos. Deputy Miller and his team secured the area, treating it now as a potential crime scene. The grate was pried open, revealing a dark, musty tunnel that smelled of stagnant water and decay. An engineering map at the ranger station confirmed our fears. The culvert system ran for nearly 2 miles, emptying into a concrete spillway near an old, decommissioned service road. It was Miller who showed the key to David Carter. David stared at it, his brows knitting together in confusion before a flicker of recognition dawned in his exhausted eyes. That's for her locker. At the art co-op in Bellingham, she kept old things, journals. That was the final piece. What the detectives found in Emily's journals wasn't a story of infidelity, but one of desperate loyalty. Her estranged younger brother, deep in debt to violent people, had reached out to her for help. The camping trip was a cover. She was meeting him to give him cash and her car, a last-ditch effort to help him escape. She told no one, least of all David, to protect them from the danger he was in. The police theory solidified quickly and grimly. The brother hadn't been alone. The people he owed money to must have followed him. They ambushed them at the meeting spot, just beyond Emily's campsite. There was no struggle because it happened too fast. They weren't after Emily, but she was a witness they couldn't leave. They forced both of them down into the culvert, a hidden escape route to a waiting car on the deserted service road. Tire tracks found at the spillway confirmed it. The search and rescue operation was over. A multi-state criminal investigation had just begun. I stood at the edge of the clearing, watching the forensics team work under the stark glare of portable lights. The mystery was solved, but the silence of the forest felt different now, not empty, but haunted by a very human tragedy. David approached me, his face still pale but the frantic terror in his eyes replaced by a profound, soul-deep sadness. "They told me," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "She was trying to save him. All this time I thought," he trailed off, shaking his head. "You know the truth now," I said softly. It was all I could offer. He looked from me to the dark maw of the culvert and back again. "Thank you," he said, the words heavy with an exhaustion that went beyond a lack of sleep, "for not giving up." I gave a simple, solemn nod. My job here was done. I turned away from the grim tableau and walked back toward my truck, the sounds of the investigation fading behind me. The immense, indifferent presence of the MT, Baker Snoqualmie National Forest, surrounded me once more. It had given up its secret, not to our technology or our numbers, but to a quiet moment of refusal to accept the impossible. The woods were just woods. The monsters, as always, were us.